So I've decided recently that in the search for, all kinds of answers and conclusions regarding gender identity and transition, one thing that's actually pretty important is making sure we're asking the right questions, like questions that are going to be actually helpful for us in our process of figuring ourselves and our paths out. And uh, so a distinction between two questions that I've found helpful lately is distinguishing the question of, like, how do I identify what is my gender identity from the question of, like, how do I want to live? And I sort of began distinguishing between those two things, which are actually quite different, after I came to a conclusion, which is, this is my opinion, not everyone has to share it, but I've basically come to the conclusion that there is no necessary, there doesn't need to be any inherent connection between one's gender identity and all the other aspects of gender, and that can include how one would like one's body to be configured, what sorts of hormones one would like to dominate one's endocrine system, what name one wants to be called, what pronoun one wants to be referred to by, presentation, haircut, clothing, all of that business, sexual orientation, and so on. There is no, one's gender identity is not determined necessarily by any of those things. Now, obviously, there are very strong, like, societal connections that are made between those things and gender identity. So, I'm not guaranteeing here that, like, um, you know, you'll always be perceived as a woman if you have short hair, or a man if you have long hair, or, a woman if you, in spite of consistently wearing men's clothing, or vice versa. You know what I mean? Like, we have, obviously, there are, like, a whole lot of factors that go into, body. There's a whole lot of factors that go into how we're actually perceived and recognized by others, but just in terms of one's own gender identity, that can be totally independent of all of those things. And so I basically come to that conclusion for myself. I want to try to respect other people's gender identities regardless of those other factors. I want to allow myself freedom to determine my gender identity independently from those other factors. But I also recognize that for others, like, it may be the case that they feel that for them, they identify as man because, for instance, they prefer male pronouns, or because, for instance, they would prefer, not to have breasts and, not to have a uterus, and so on, right? I mean, so for others, like, they may think that personally those things are an indicator of their gender identity. But I think even then I would advise and encourage others to see that as something that is important for them, because for another person, it may be an entirely different set of factors that may lead them to conclude that they should hold such and such a gender identity. So there may be links for other people. Other people, some people may also just have a really strong sense of their gender identity that doesn't necessarily have any relation to those other things, right? And so I think that's been a healthy recognition on my part, and something that's been productive for me. On the other hand, it's had the strange effect of making the question of gender identity seem kind of incidental to me. Like, not like it's made it feel less important. Like, if it's just this kind of nebulous, abstract thing that one sometimes feels, but doesn't necessarily have any relation to any of the questions about how, you want to live. Like, if it's just kind of that, I don't know that I personally have a strong inner sense of what my gender identity is. You know what I mean? Like, I can tell you very definite things about my preferences in all of those other fields, or many of those other fields. Like, I know that, I didn't want breasts, hence the top surgery. I prefer being referred to by certain names and pronouns and not others, but, I prefer presenting in a certain way. I certainly have, a range of presentations and styles that I'm comfortable with, that I wouldn't be comfortable with others. But I don't, because I've managed to do this mental separation between those things and gender identity, I no longer have any compelling reason to feel that I have to identify it in any particular way. The only time that Obviously, I feel the need to do so is when I'm talking, like when I'm in a discussion about gender and I feel the need to identify myself in some particular manner. But usually I'll just say, this is the name I go by, these are the pronouns I use, without saying that they're male or female pronouns, and this is how you can address me. So I address those very practical concerns rather than saying I identify as X, Y, or Z. And again, other people may have a sense of their gender identity, and that's great, and I will totally respect that. It's just that for me, coming to that realization has both made the question of gender identity less urgent for me, and also freed me up to think of more in terms of, I don't have to come to a conclusion on that. I can think about all of these other things. And I don't know whether that makes me essentially agender or non-binary or what have you, and I just live as such and such, and do certain things, or that I don't have a gender identity. I mean, I don't know what it means. Maybe I'll eventually come to the conclusion that, like, I effectively like living as and being perceived as male, and therefore I will identify as male too. But for now, I don't really feel a need to do that, and that's actually been a really good development. So I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on that, and I don't know, maybe it will be helpful for other people too.